change? For now or for the longer term? Let's get started.
Another race for the world's greatest driver, Juan Manuel Fangio.
Former world champion Jim Clark leapt into the lead. That's Clark's Lotus going like a bomb.
And James Hunt is the world champion by just one single point.
By being a racing driver, you are under risk all the time. And if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver.
And that is Michael Schumacher ahead, the world champion.
To become a four-time world champion, Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, champion of the world.
That's for all the kids out there who dream the impossible.
Max Verstappen is champion of the world.
Oh my God! Max Verstappen, you are the world champion! The world champion!
Hello and welcome to episode 29 of F1 in Review 2023. I'm Tom Clabon and as ever I'm joined by Tristan Fancourt and Angus Gallager. Today we look back at the Singapore Grand Prix where Ferraris, yes Ferraris, Carlos Sainz, not Red Bull's Max Verstappen, won this race after qualifying in P1. Another excellent performance and win for the Spaniard. Is this his best so far, do we think?
I think so. I think this is his best drive ever. And given you've just highlighted that the Ferrari won, that of course has broken Max Verstappen's 10 race streak. So, who was closest out of us all? I don't think it was me because I said that Max Verstappen would keep winning till next year. So I'm out of that particular bet. But go back a couple of episodes when we all highlighted who would, how long we thought Max would win. Who out of you two got the closest?
I went for Austin, Texas. So
yeah, you were a few races away. I went for Las Vegas, so Tom was the closest on this one.
Woo!
Oh, congratulations! You are the least pessimistic.
Yeah,
or most optimistic. It depends whether how you want to look at it, whether or not you're a glass half full or empty sort of person. But this was a great exercise in race strategy, I think, from Carlos Sainz. And also Lando Norris as well. Honourable mention to Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc for their parts as well in aiding Sainz's win. And it really was an aid because Lando Norris didn't attack Sainz because he wanted to keep P2. And Charles Leclerc was sacrificed, in the words of Mercedes. They said, Charles Leclerc is being sacrificed by Ferrari, which was a great radio message. And many images sort of came up into my mind of him being sacrificed for Sainz's victory. But Sainz had the forethought and the excellent thinking to drag Norris forwards and forwards through the DRS zones and allow him to be a lovely barrier between himself and the Mercedes of George Russell and Lewis Hamilton, who had pitted for stronger and newer tyres towards the end. I don't think we can fault Sainz at all. Absolute, complete domination of a race weekend. And, thank God, right? What a breath of fresh air in a season that has been, I think, should we say, the middling low in excitement? But Singapore started off as a bit of a dull, race, but my goodness, it ended up being fantastic. And I really do think, at the moment, Carlos Sainz is the number one driver at Ferrari.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Fair shout. In terms of the race, I remember speaking to a colleague at work earlier in the season about one of the races where Red Bull weren't as dominant, and he said it again yesterday. Look how good it is at the moment in Formula One when Red Bull are nowhere to be seen. It's absolutely brilliant, as seen by the race yesterday. The fact that you had the top four nose to tail for large portions of the race. I know, sure, part of that was manufactured by Sainz's brilliant tactical nous of being able to back Norris into the Mercedes so that they would all get DRS and that he could stretch his legs at the right points. But at the same time, the race was still illuminated by the fact that there was a real close battle and by the fact that Red Bull weren't a part of it. Now, that's no disrespect to Red Bull because they've done a brilliant job with their car this year. And again, that's to be commended in terms of how dominant their design has managed to be. But it was just fantastic, that race that at the end where you had the tactical battle, the virtual safety car, So many thanks to Esteban Ocon for his car self-combusting, because that really set things up for the last few laps. And it was probably, I'd say, one of my favourite races of the year so far. Zandvoort sticks in the mind as a topsy-turvy race. I thought that as well. Australia, of course, was very dramatic, and Silverstone just seems to stick in. Silverstone always seems to produce a good race with some good overtaking. But Singapore, I think, for me, trumps the lot of them so far this year. I'd be interested to get your guys' thoughts on where you'd rank this race this year, because I think that was excellent. It's also one of the better Singapore Grand Prix I can remember, just for the closeness of the battle. And not only at the front, you had multiple... I know you had different tyre strategies and advantages from further back, but you had multiple battles and overtakes. You had nice little battles between Gasly and Piastri for sixth. You had Liam Lawson trying to hang on for dear life in the points with cars like Perez, Albon, Hulkenberg breathing down his neck. I thought it was a great race. Where would you rank it this year in terms of where it is in the pecking order of great races?
I think it'd be very difficult not to have it as at least a top 3 race of this season, and that's not because of the variety factor. I think often that inflates a race really when you see somebody else win after a streak of dominance by Verstappen and Red Bull. But you're so right, really. It was one of those that it was a bit of a slow burner to start with. It was helped out by the safety cars, be that virtual or otherwise, but it was an excellent race right until the end. And part of me feels, yes, it would have been even better if there were more overtaking opportunities, indeed completed overtakes in the final factor of the race. But to see 4 cars that close fighting for P1, not P2, not P3, not P4, the actual win of the race is remarkable, frankly. And it was spiced up as well by, unfortunately, George Russell's late accident as well. But I think, realistically speaking, we'll get onto Mercedes later on. It was a bold move, a gamble, but one that wasn't really paying off for them. But I think this win for Sainz really did echo his other win really at Silverstone last year, where you saw him have to not only be excellent on track in terms of his qualifying pace and the race pace as well, but also had to go and bring out his strategic knowledge, his knowledge of racing and how to go and play his cards. And he was helped as well, it's fair to say, by his team. And obviously that is something that a team should be doing. But I think it's worth saying that so many times we rightly critique Ferrari for their misdemeanors and their simple mistakes. This time round, I think they did a very good job, if I'm honest, for both him and for Leclerc, all things considered as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was weird about this race is it kind of had a lot of different elements of it that sort of threw me back to past races as well. So it felt like Abu Dhabi in 2016 when Rosberg was being backed up into Sebastian Vettel by Lewis Hamilton, when Lewis Hamilton desperately wanted Rosberg to be overtaken so he would lose the Drivers' Championship and Hamilton would therefore get enough points to win. It had elements of, I feel like, Abu Dhabi 2021, when we had that sort of late people breaking down, having accidents, and then a real close fight at the end with dramatic, proper drama. I mean, I wasn't even on the edge of my seat. I was standing up by the end of it. And then I also had elements of Azerbaijan 2021 as well, with Lewis Hamilton keeping the front brake bias in and locking up and going off, just like George Russell did. Well, apart from Russell hit the wall and kept going. But I had those elements, those real spicy elements. It's about everything crammed into one in a really short period of time as well. That was the other thing. It sort of like flicked between, oh, well, are we going to watch the whole thing? Do we need to watch the whole race? To, oh my God, how are we not, how is this still going on? This is nuts. I was absolutely brilliant. And I think it really shows that Sainz could keep calm and cool under pressure as well, because many other drivers would have succumbed. And I'm not saying that against someone like George Russell who made a mistake, but it's those glorious moments, those sort of defining elements of a race that really make you stop and think, wow, that's brilliant. That's great. Wow, well done. And I feel like we haven't had that for a while. And you're right, it did kind of remind me of Silverstone as well in Sainz's last win. But if you remember Sainz's last win, he had that same sort of pressure when we had sort of 4 cars into one, with people like Lewis Hamilton catching up and trying to get past as well. So he seems to be the smooth operator, being able to counter the pressure behind him and able to keep going and play the smart moves, which is absolutely fantastic. And I genuinely think that Sainz is going to stay at Ferrari longer than perhaps others have predicted, because what he demonstrated this weekend was he's able to rescue Ferrari from a season that has been very, very disappointing. If Ferrari hadn't won even a single race, I think they would have been, sparks been flying again in Ferrari's internal management system, and again, heads may have rolled. But I think Sainz has sort of rescued them from that internal bickering, because by showing they can win, it prevents them from yet again tearing themselves into tiny little pieces and trying to pick it up and for next year. So yeah, I feel like Sainz has really dug Ferrari out of a ditch, and to the Tifosi, who I think were very disappointed, I think they can just breathe a little sigh of relief, because even if no one else gets a win this season, if Red Bull completely dominate it, at least they can turn around and say, well, we were the ones that broke that streak.
Mm-hmm. And off the back of that, do you think any other team driver, aside from those who have already won a race, will win a race themselves? Because I think it's quite up in the air at the moment, isn't it? Interesting
point, but if we're talking the rest of the season, am I inclined to think this is a one-off, this race? I don't want to say yes, but I feel like the unusual characteristics of the Singapore track compared to the rest of the calendar meant that, this is kind of not going to be the norm. I know that it's the second race in a row we've seen a Ferrari on pole position, but as we saw in Monza, when the Red Bulls were starting higher up, their race pace was just too much for Ferrari. In this race, you had in Singapore a track where the walls are tighter, overtaking is more challenging, and as a result, the Ferraris, in this case Sainz, could stay ahead more easily, especially when the Red Bulls were outside the top 10 completely. I think that if Red Bull had maybe not gambled on that strategy, so keeping out the 2 drivers during that safety car period towards the start for the crash of Logan Sargent, they might have been able to get a better result. But I think that, to go back to my original point, in the future races, the pace of the Red Bull will become clear again. I can still see Red Bull winning 7 out of the final 7 races. And I think that we should appreciate this moment as it is, because somebody else won a race and that was quite nice. And Carlos Sainz to be that person, like we said, is a great drive from him. Those rumours about him going to Audi in the future, those seem to have quietened down, don't they? He's had a very strong return from the summer break. 3 results in the top 5, 2 poles, and then probably one of the tactical masterclasses of recent years this weekend.
So you don't see Mercedes then winning a race to have their day in the sun, maybe?
No, I don't, just because I think that Red Bull will come roaring back. I think that the tracks left suit their... the track in Singapore was an anomaly because of its street circuit nature. The only one that could be called similar in the remaining races maybe Las Vegas, but then that's a complete unknown for everyone. I just think the Red Bull car is... We can't forget, has been at this point the most dominant car in F1 history, winning 14 races out of 14 this season, and winning 16, 17 dating back to the end of the last season. It's having the longest winning streak in history. I don't think we can overlook that. And it was brilliant this weekend having Sainz win, but I just don't think that... I don't see how it won't go back to Red Bull being in charge again next weekend, if I'm honest.
If you remember at the beginning of the season, or earlier in the season, I think we said that the best chance was going to be somewhere like Monaco for another team winning, and that's because a track like Monaco, once you get in front, it's very easy to stay there because you basically have a blockade. Your car is the blockade, and you can't really fit 2 cars side by side. Now, Singapore is, as I think I described it last week, and I stand by this, as sort of like Saudi Arabia / Azerbaijan meets Monaco, and it has the same sort of problem. As long as you've got the traction, in the key accelerating points in Singapore, you can basically just stay ahead because it's a pretty tight track. It's a very tight track, actually. But unlike Monaco, you can actually overtake, as was evidenced this weekend. And so I think as soon as Red Bull fell back, they knew it was going to be a really hard time to pick up the pieces and get that magical comeback and a win. And the other thing to mention about Singapore is not only is the track difficult, but the tractors did not favour the Red Bull setup. And I think that's partly why Aston Martin had the same issues, and they particularly struggled as well. And I think it's because they both have the same kind of design ethos. And we will never know exactly what Red Bull struggled to get quite right, because that would be giving out key aerodynamic secrets and data. But what we do know is throughout the whole weekend, Max was oversteering in free practice, and then they were going to change it, and then suddenly he'd be understeering, and then he'd be basically drifting around. He described it as driving on ice. So whatever, in Singapore, maybe it was the very slidey, sticky, damp texture that the track has because of the humidity. Whatever reason, he couldn't get the traction down. He couldn't get the stability. And then as soon as he was behind, just like in Monaco, he can't really get ahead again. So I think what we saw was kind of Monaco 2.0 when Aston Martin nearly won against Red Bull. But this time there was a team ready with the strategic foresight and the qualifying pace to get in front of Red Bull in the first place. So unless that all comes together again, I can't see Red Bull losing. Japan, I think next week is going to be again another Red Bull domination. I'm sorry, I think it's just going to be like that. Now, Angus, you point out Las Vegas, and I agree. That could be an anomaly. It depends how wide the track is. It depends how good the track is as well, because you can have a wide track that is just unbelievably difficult to overtake at, because it's just one of those things where if the corners aren't right, then unless you can beat someone on the straights, then you're just going to be stuck behind. So yeah, Red Bull, I think, is going to be flying again and we all should prepare ourselves for the Dutch national anthem to return to our screens next week.
And I think as well that you look at Sainz's win, you look at Ferrari's win here, and it's made even better by how, well, for want of a better phrase, underwhelming and awful Mercedes and Red Bull were here by going on two different strategies. You went for Mercedes going for the let's sack off track position, get the fresher tyres in and have a go at them for the last 10 to 15 laps. Meanwhile, compare that to Red Bull, who went for track position on steroids, decided to ideally never pit their drivers until their tyres literally were able to explode. And I think you saw there that there's no easy answers, there's no easy way out of Singapore, really. It is not only a battle for the strategists, if you will, but also for the drivers, as insofar as it's very demanding upon themselves, be that physically, mentally, etc. So I think looking at that as well also hammers home how Ferrari have perhaps come on a bit better than previously, because I think if we'd have seen a Ferrari of a season or 2 seasons ago be put in this very position, you'd have seen a scenario where they'd have struggled to go and decide which driver they were going to back, for want of a better phrase, which driver they wanted to win that race, and perhaps would have perhaps left themselves open to a McLaren, a Mercedes, or somebody further back. But I think there's reasons to be optimistic for Ferrari, especially when we see how other teams fared as well.
Would you say, Tom, that this weekend symbolised Ferrari's own change in perspective when it comes to the drivers, in that they were willing to sacrifice Leclerc for Sainz?
Yeah, I would, because I think that when Sainz was brought in and Leclerc was given that huge contract, it was quite clear that while it wasn't spelt out to everybody, Sainz was the second driver and Leclerc was the next big thing. I think that Sainz this season, previously as well, has really shown his worth to the team and shown that he's not just a stopgap, for want of a better phrase. I do think that he was brought in perhaps like Mercedes brought Bottas in, to a point of, well, he's done well with a good team and he'll be good for now until somebody else comes along and younger talent, fresher talent, a more prodigy type will come in to go and steer the ship forwards along with Leclerc. But I think that this race, the race before that at Monza as well, and his more recent form has perhaps shown that they're more equal, because I understand the prior points made about Leclerc, the pressure's on him, he's got to go and get the best out of his car, but we're seeing a lot more mistakes, be that terminal or minor mistakes from him, than we are from Sainz, and I appreciate that Sainz perhaps isn't able to have the quality ceiling, if you will, that Leclerc will have, in my view. But I think he's surprising a few, and is getting the recognition now that he deserves, because he wasn't really the flavour of the month for Toro Rosso, for Renault. He was only at McLaren where he was given a strong chance to go and prove himself, and he's pretty much at every turn, be that with McLaren or Ferrari, proven why he should be at that team and why he deserves a seat at the top table. So credit to him. Do you agree with that at all, or do you think the hierarchy remains?
In terms of with Sainz and the hierarchy at Ferrari, yeah, I mean, I like the phrase you used there, Tom, the flavour of the month, and how he's at all his different teams, he's never really been the person who is more favoured. Like Verstappen got all the attention at Toro Rosso, Hülkenberg outdid him at Renault, Norris got the attention at McLaren a lot of the time, but he still put himself forward. And then Leclerc is supposed to be the golden boy of Ferrari, but Sainz his performances since the summer window have been much better. Does that make him a number one driver? Not necessarily. But I think that he's definitely put himself on a stronger footing when it comes to contract negotiations, because his contract runs out at the end of 2024. Mm-hmm. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think that's right,
yeah. So, like, it's that time where he'll be looking around. Would he be scouted by one of the top teams? Or one of the other top teams, I should say. I wouldn't necessarily think so, because he couldn't go to Red Bull because him and Verstappen didn't get along well as teammates back in the day. Mercedes, they've got their two drivers tied down. Aston Martin, Alonso's there and Stroll's there till the day the planet ceases to exist. Who else? McLaren, they've got their two, Norris and Piastri. You can't see that changing. So Ferrari's his best option right now. I think he just has to make the most of that, and what he can do is always just prove himself by keeping on working and putting in performance. If he puts in performances like he did at this weekend, that hierarchy might soon change.
Excellent save, Angus. We're nearly calling Ferrari not a top team, which is
yes, the other top teams,
angered a large swathe of the fans out there. Yeah,
our Italian audience just drops to zero.
Yeah. I think Tom, I agree. I mean, it's partly the reason I posed the question, so I could have a little echo chamber of my own really. And I do think Sainz has basically broken down the barriers now, and clearly shown again that he's able to take the bull by the horns and get Ferrari back up and kicking, even if it's temporarily. And you can't say better than that, because it's all about opportunities. Leclerc didn't take full opportunity, of the weekend. Sainz did, and Sainz has done that now a couple of times. And so I really do think we can say that this year, especially after the summer break, Sainz has kicked himself up to the next gear. He nearly did it in Monza, and he has done it in Singapore. And so if you'd like, I think the mistake in Japan where they put up Sainz's poster and number against both Ferrari garages perhaps was like the crowning symbol, in that all eyes are on Carlos Sainz at the moment of Ferrari, and perhaps Leclerc has actually dropped back into the shadows, which I don't think is something any of us thought we were going to be saying at the beginning of the year, last year, or especially the year before that.
Definitely, and I think the conversation's now turning away from Sainz is lucky to be at Ferrari to Ferrari are lucky to have Sainz, because, as you say, he's able to go and scoop out some good performances there in consecutive races against what is a very, very difficult team in Red Bull, and an equally, it's fair to say, when it comes to Mercedes. So credit to him there. We can't not talk about Mercedes, of course. They left this one with just a P3 to their name, despite qualifying in P2 and P5. A DNF, as mentioned there, for George Russell after both those Mercedes pitted on lap 45 for the mediums. I've mentioned it was a gamble. It's one that didn't pay off, but what are our thoughts there on Mercedes rolling the dice and going for the win, really?
They're in an unusual position, weren't they? They used to being the aggressor, the leader, the dominant force, but once again in a race in the last 2 or so years, they've had to be the ones who take the gamble. And you know what? I respected it massively. I massively respected it. They were in what? Was it 2nd and 4th? Am I right in saying that?
5th.
Russell, yeah, 2nd and 5th in qualifying, and then at the time of the safety car, with the virtual safety car, they were 2nd and 4th, I think.
Yep. Yeah.
And they both pitted, which left 2 Ferraris and a McLaren in front. And I massively respect them pitting because they sacrificed, especially in the case of Russell, they sacrificed a podium. Ignore the fact he crashed out, because that would have sacrificed a lot more. But without that crash, he sacrificed a podium anyhow. And they've gone for the gamble. They've gone, right, we're going to try and win this race. They perhaps think, alluding to my earlier point, that might be one of the only opportunities they would have got to have won a race this year. So I rate what they did in the end with that. Did it pay off? No, it didn't. Not quite. But you know what? You got to try these things sometimes. I think they're in a position where they will get at least 3rd in the Constructors' Championship. Obviously, Ferrari have closed in this race especially, but they will still get at least 3rd. There's nothing wrong with taking the little gamble to try and see what can be made of it. So I massively respected what they did. Big shame for Russell. I think he's having a bit of an off year, personally. I don't think that's too unfair to say. Hamilton stepped it up compared to last year. Russell's been decent, but he hasn't got any pole positions or wins to show for it. Hamilton has that 1 pole position back in Hungary. But in terms of the short term, just that one race, I respected what Mercedes did. They went for it, and it would have been easy for them to play the safe option and try and get those points, but they wanted win. They've only experienced that feeling of winning once since Saudi Arabia 2021. If you told me that it's after Saudi Arabia 2021 that Mercedes would win only one of the next 38 races since then, I think it is, I'd have laughed at you. But it's the fact of the matter, it's the way they are at the moment. So I respect them for going for the win because they wanted that winning feeling, and it almost paid off. But for brilliant driving from Sainz.
It's very difficult, isn't it? Because I'm on the George Russell topic, and he's received a lot of hate, I think, on various social media platforms at the weekend I saw, and especially after his mistake. And I feel like it's been a bit undeserved, actually. There was a lot of this nonsense about, oh, well, he's a poor driver because, he made the mistake and threw away that position of 3rd place, and he could have had so much better, and you never see anyone else making that mistake, blah, 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 blah. Of course, they have very short memories, those people, because Lewis Hamilton made the mistake in Azerbaijan 2021. There is countless mistakes Max Verstappen has made over his years. At one point, I think 2017, people wondering whether or not he's going to be kept in Red Bull with the amount of crashes he had. I don't know, for some reason, people really don't like George Russell. I think it's because he kind of has that snooty British vibe about him. I mean, to us, I think he sounds like a normal bloke to me, but maybe he doesn't have the best international image, but, whatever. I think I agree with Angus, though, on the wider point of Mercedes making the right call, because it very nearly paid off. Don't forget that George Russell, for a moment, actually did overtake Lando Norris and only lost out on the traction and from sliding around a bit. And so they was pretty much on the edge. It's as close to 50-50 as I've seen in a long time. I cannot think of another race where a strategy has been that close to not to between the lead and 2nd or 3rd place. I can think of like other opportunities. For example, Bottas overtaking Stroll for 3rd back in Azerbaijan and times like that. A long while back on the last lap and things like that. But this was incredibly tight, very, very close, and it gave us an immense race as well. So I think Mercedes made the right choice. Their choice was either sit behind a Ferrari like a lame duck, or give it their best shot, pressure Sainz into a mistake, and get both drivers, I think, in effect, to the top steps of the podium. Now, yeah, it didn't pay off. It's very easy to say in hindsight, but jolly good show, I think, really. Thank Mercedes for doing that. And I think if they went back, they would have made the same choice again. And I think that's what really shows you the good strategy. You don't walk away go, well, we messed that up. I think Mercedes have walked away thinking, wow, we really shook Ferrari then, and we very nearly made that work. And so, yeah, they didn't really lose anything, because whilst, yes, they sacrificed a position and let the McLaren of Lando Norris into second, in reality, they still had Hamilton in the end in third. And I think really that's where Hamilton was most likely to end up anyway. So I don't think they really lost out, apart from, of course, George Russell following Lando Norris's line, and both him and the McLaren hit the wall. It's such a bizarre thing in Formula One, isn't it? How you can have two very, very similar collisions, and yet one is just monumentally more dramatic than the other. Lando Norris got away with it. George Russell taking the slightly wider line in order to try and get better traction, obviously hit the barrier slightly harder and ended up into the wall. So on the last lap as well, it was heartbreaking. Do you remember George Webber's scream of Azerbaijan? That came back into my head when that happened. So yeah, I think Mercedes can be pretty proud of that again. I think this race really demonstrated how you can have many different schools of thought and they can all be kind of correct.
Yeah, I think this race for Mercedes just shows how important finer margins are when it comes to where you finish and how you looked upon, really, because in my view, if they'd have pitted their two cars, or indeed one of their cars, earlier and given them more laps to go and have a go at the McLaren of Norris and also Sainz as well, we could be talking about a different story. If Russell had have not had that incident, we'd be talking about a different story as well. So I think they very nearly got what they wanted and very nearly showed vast improvements and stole a victory, or indeed two podiums, when they had no right to do so to a point. And I think previously, when Mercedes have been in their rougher form, shall we say, post Abu Dhabi, post regulation change, they've been accused of being a bit unambitious, of a bit safe, of let's just go and get some podiums under our belt, let's just make sure we keep track position, and that's absolutely fine. Here you saw the reversal of that. You saw them really going for it like they did in Old Red, and you can't really deter or indeed critique somebody for doing that too much. The only thing I say about that is really it should have been done perhaps, of course with hindsight, should have been done slightly earlier, because they did give their drivers a lot to do really on a track where position is king. So I think, as I say, if things had been slightly different, we'd have been talking about Mercedes a lot higher up in our podcast, and indeed more positively as well.
And for them, it's kind of at this stage where, until they get to the point where they get back to having regular victories, or more regular victories, they'll just need to take any opportunity they can get. They might almost need to look at the rest of this season and go, well, forget the battle for second or third. Let's try and get that winning feeling back, so that when it comes to leading into next season, they can start on the front foot and be like, right, we won these races last year, confidence is higher, let's focus on the car and where we can improve it. And then when you come to those situations where you need to try and grab the bull by the horns, literally, in the case of Red Bull, and try and get that victory, you need to be ready for it. I think of Ferrari last year when they won those couple of races at the start of the year, but as the year went on, you could tell you could call it like win rustiness. They had been through such a long period where they hadn't really won much, that when they needed to take opportunities to win, they just didn't have that winning feeling enough to know how to grasp it, if that makes sense. So Mercedes need to, I reckon, try and go for some victories where possible when they get opportunities, to try and get that almost that confidence back and inject it into them, so that they can then take that positive momentum forward and hopefully look towards a stronger 2024.
And what do we make of Mercedes insofar as how they handle their drivers? Because I think previously between Russell and Hamilton it's been very, very sweet, and it wasn't sour this weekend. But I think we saw one or two sort of sparks of, let's say, confrontation, conflict maybe in terms of position, speed and the like. Do you agree, or think I'm going a bit farther?
I think you're a bit far there, actually. I don't agree. I think, like, if you take the race beginning, Hamilton was very late on the brakes, and he was under control. I don't quite agree with Norris's radio message, but he had to go and leave the track because if he turned in, there was a George Russell already there. And so he, for example, overtook George and Norris off the track and then gave those positions back. I think George was right to say, look, is he giving me them back? Because the thing is, what you got to remember with those sort of messages is the team has to give the position back without compromising Hamilton and without compromising George. So I wouldn't read too much into that. And I think also as we went on, and especially towards the end of the race, I think it was quite key that you didn't really hear Hamilton, apart from the one message, trying to get past George. I think they were pretty clear to both drivers that in fighting each other, they would only lose the overall battle, and they would lose the war, should we say. So I think Hamilton was right trying to ask whether or not George could go faster, especially with Singapore being a track where you kind of hang on to your tyres for as long as you can. And I think the team was pretty clear in making sure that George had the track position, wasn't being defensive against Hamilton, so that they could both try and win. So no, I think the team dynamic was pretty good. It has been, I think, at times a little bit fractious, and we know that Mercedes can be biased towards one driver, and they are very quick to be like, for example, to Bottas and Hamilton, they'd be very quick to be like, oh, Bottas, yeah, we're fighting. So Hamilton's behind you, he's going to fight you. But if Bottas was behind Hamilton, they'd be like, no, we're keeping position, mate. You can stay there, it's fine. Whereas I think George has sort of pushed that a little bit more, and I think it's always race dependent. And I think overall this weekend, Mercedes were right to keep George in the lead. In the end, it didn't matter, did it? Which is a bit weird.
No.
Yeah, I would say it's absolutely fine, which is nice, really, because we don't want a repetition of the Hamilton versus Rosberg era.
No, but then I reckon you only get that repetition if the stakes go up, and I don't think you're not going to get too much fight and fisticuffs when you're fighting for fourth place. Like, that's not what they're paid the big bucks for. But if they manage to imagine a scenario where Hamilton goes for his 8th title in 2025, his final year in Formula One, but the man standing in his way is his younger nemesis of a teammate. Imagine the fireworks that could prevail there. But first, they have to get there. Oh, you're making me salivate with excitement. That's a wonderful thought, isn't it? But
it's quite the finale.
Yeah. Throw Max Verstappen in there as well, 3-way fight to the end. Oh, that'd be dramatic. Carlos Sainz bring up the rear as well. Tifosi's excitement. Well, we can only dream for a four-way fight for the beginning for the World Championship. Oh, amazing! God, that'd be years.
The question is, who's going to be the Latifi, if you will, to go and be Kingmaker?
Liam
Plot twist. It'll be Valtteri Bottas in his final F1 race.
Couldn't write it.
Shafting Hamilton.
You think so? I think supporting Hamilton. I think purposely hitting the barriers, punting off Russell, and then Sainz.
Or conveniently not letting Russell through with a blue flag, something like that.
Yeah, but I think what's weird about this season, I think we know he said the Mercedes been rusty, right? I think that's a really good way of putting it, and I think they have got a bit rusty because they haven't been in the position where they haven't had a completely dominant car since go all the way back to Rosberg and Michael Schumacher. And that period of Mercedes, once they'd returned back into the sport, taking over from Brawn F1, and I think they've kind of forgotten what it is to develop a car, and so that has left them, I think, in the doldrums a bit this season. But they've said that they're going to be taking a different design approach for next year and going forward. So I do wonder whether or not this sort of final period of the no pods car, which it still kind of is because they haven't been able to re-engineer their entire chassis, their survival cell, and the other underpinnings of the car yet. But I feel like once they go towards the Red Bull design, I feel like they will have thrown off the shackles of that rustiness and they'll return back to form. Because Mercedes seems to pull out the blinders when they're at the sort of the top, as illustrated by this weekend when they pulled out a blind over a strategy and nearly completely, dampened the mood of the Ferrari by almost securing themselves a 1-2 in a track that we all thought they were perhaps not necessarily going to be able to do very well at.
It's crazy how minds can be changed by the recent past and recent memories, because I think when it comes to Mercedes, because they've failed really to get their head fully around the new regulations and to go and translate that into a race-winning car on a regular basis, I think seeing's believing in my view, because you've got to have Red Bull at the very top of the game again, Ferrari seemingly going in the right direction but strong nonetheless this season being a good example. They've sometimes not been at the races but have the ability, as we've seen in the last weekend, to go and win a race. But Mercedes, if I could sort of describe them in one word, it would be potential. They're nearly, aren't they? They're, the driver pairing, that's a good one. There's some potential there. Toto Wolff and the team, that looks good. Qualifying, that's a lot of potential. And it doesn't translate. So I think really, despite their years of dominance, for me personally, Mercedes have got it all to prove if they want to be that dominant team again, in my view. And now we look forwards to the Japanese Grand Prix. We've got to, of course, touch a bit on Red Bull to start with, though. It was an unusual performance by their high standards, Verstappen finishing in P5, Perez in P8, but one Red Bull driver who did very well, exceeded expectations no less, Liam Lawson in P9, scoring his first ever Formula 1 points in the third time of asking. What can we expect from him, Red Bull, everybody involved really, Tsunoda and co, when it comes to the next Grand Prix being the Japanese Grand Prix, because we understand that Ricciardo may not make that still.
Yeah, exactly. Weird, right? AlphaTauri certainly is going to be sport for choice, and it was really interesting in qualifying that Liam Lawson was able to bump out Max Verstappen. God, that was a real throwing down the gauntlet moment, wasn't it? Not only did Lawson overtook Max in the Netherlands, granted it was to sort of overtake him, so unlap himself, but it was still an overtake nonetheless, and then bumps him out of key 2. God, absolutely nuts, crazy. So yeah, he's definitely demonstrated his pace, and it was really sweet afterwards to see Max congratulating Lawson on that feat, because yeah, it's no easy feat, and I think Max knows what it's like to be an up and coming rookie. So that was quite nice as well, that there wasn't any hard feelings. Not that there should be anyway, but it was, excellent stuff. But I think that we could all be prepared. We should all be prepared that it's going to go back to normal in Japan. My prediction for this weekend is Red Bull's going to be right back on it. They were last year in Japan, and there's no reason they shouldn't be. Bear in mind as well that this was Singapore, and Max Verstappen finished in 5th place. At one point, thanks to their poor strategy, they were down in 18th place, the Red Bulls, and they brought themselves all the way back up again at a track that is not very easy to overtake. Max really came to life in the last sort of few laps, and he had a bit of luck as well, because Russell crashing out meant he got P5 in the end. But that's that. I was like, oh, hold on a minute, Max is up at P5. No, bad Max, you're back. You're back at the pack. What are you doing there? So I think certainly when we go towards Japan, we need to be prepared for this celebration and this little break, shall we say, in the middle of the season, towards the end, I guess now it is, but to be very much over. And Max is going to be back with absolute force to prove that he has not gone anywhere. So expect a 30-second delta between himself and whichever poor sod is trying to chase him in second in Japan.
I'm saying, I'm thinking he's going to win by 17 seconds in this race. Japan coming up, very specific, I know, but has all the hallmarks of him just absolutely coming back and destroying the field. Hamilton used to do this for fun. He'd have a stinker of a race, and the next race it would be like he'd never been away. Like he would just utterly obliterate everybody. And I think that the Japan track Suzuka will suit the characteristics of the car more. It's your classic, more sort of standard, purpose-built circuit. Variety of corners, but it's more fast in nature. I think McLaren could suit it more. It has similarities to Silverstone. I think how Silverstone was like the start of their, near the start of their resurgence, and I remember them being particularly strong at Silverstone out of all the races they've been good at. So I'm backing McLaren to do well. I think Ferrari as well, I back them to continue sort of a reasonably strong run of form. Sainz looks in good form. But I'm saying that Verstappen is going to win this one by 17 seconds. Specific prediction. I only have one other thought to add on that Red Bull situation. A simple sentence. Get Liam Lawson in that AlphaTauri seat. ASAP.
Boy. Who's he replacing?
Ricciardo, obviously.
Oh, interesting. Yep. So you support Tsunoda?
I think that Tsunoda has done just enough. I don't think you can bank on Ricciardo because, of course, he's broken. I'm not saying that because he's broken his wrist, his career's done. But like, Lawson is the future. He's more of a prospect. Lawson will. I think give Lawson 2 years in that Toro Rosso. Give him 2 years in that AlphaTauri, and he replaces Perez in the Red Bull in 2026. Or even 2025.
You said the same about Nick De Vries, I'll remind you, Angus. You said Nick De Vries is coming for Perez.
And I did. And that's fair enough, because Nick De Vries came in, he scored a 9th place and impressed a lot of people. And what did Nick De Vries do next? He went to AlphaTauri. Now, I've seen a story today linking Liam Lawson with currently, it's not necessarily vacant, well, it depends who you talk to, the current seat at Williams. Because Logan Sargent is looking a bit precarious. Alex Albon, we know, will be there as he leads the Williams, what they hope is the charge, up to the midfield area, away from the sort of where they are now in 7th up to like 5th and 6th. Could Liam Lawson to Williams happen? Discuss. I think there's a possibility, just because Williams have shown openness to loan drive. It would be a loan because he's a Red Bull driver, but Alex Albon's loaned from Red Bull as well. Piastri was touted to go there on loan from Alpine before that whole psychodrama happened in the courts this time last year. Liam Lawson to Williams, I think he's done enough to. It's 3 races, but he's done very good for someone who's had to jump in so quick. He's been very impressive.
Without being harsh to Logan Sargent, I think we can already see that Lawson replacing him would be an improvement, because I think that Lawson's already shown his quality, that he can go and score points consistently in a difficult scenario as well. And I think that when it comes to Sargent, he's slowly morphing into a pay driver Latifi-esque model, where he's good to have about for dependability to a point and also for the sources of income. But when you're talking about racing drivers to win points to get you high in the constructors, he falls quite far down my list, honestly.
I think it's going to be tricky, because in my world, I think that Liam Lawson has proven himself in a way that perhaps Nick De Vries didn't. Nick De Vries was lucky in the Williams to be in Monza, and he even admits that, and that actually was a suitable track for the Williams of last year, and there was not very many suitable tracks for the Williams of last year. And so I think if I was him, I'd be looking around at the moment and thinking, right, well, AlphaTauri's on the cusp of announcing Ricciardo and De Vries for next year. Where am I going to go instead? And looking up and down the field, there's not much there apart from Logan Sargent's seat. And look, if AlphaTauri can poach Nick De Vries from Williams, then Williams should be able to poach Liam Lawson from AlphaTauri. And even if that's a 1-year contract, right, to go there and stay within the Red Bull bubble, that's still a thing that can happen. Alex Albon is still affiliated to Red Bull in Williams. It would be a bit weird, wouldn't it, that 2 Red Bull sort of seats have ended up with Williams, but it's worked brilliantly for Alex Albon. And I think it would be really interesting to see Williams with 2 drivers that have been properly proved. Logan Sargent, I think, is an uninteresting choice now, which is annoying, because I was very excited for him to get into the sport and get that seat. But he has consistently been behind where he should be. And this is very cutthroat. It is very cutthroat. And look, I want Williams to do well, which means sacrificing and cutting off perhaps the things that are holding them back. And if you're Williams now, well, yeah, Logan Sargent's holding them back. They are under threat from Haas. Haas had the opportunity for big points this weekend, and they came away with only 1, which was a bit of bad luck, but also thanks to the fact that Haas decides to eat its tyres like crazy. But Haas is still a threat. And Williams needs 2 solid drivers. So, yeah, in my perfect world, unfortunately, Logan Sargent would be demoted back to test driver for Williams. And Liam Lawson would be loaned out to Williams for a year. Ricciardo stays in AlphaTauri. Tsunoda stays in AlphaTauri. And everyone's a winner. And I think that's best for the fans as well.
Not a bad solution. As we draw to a close, though, for my bold prediction for Japan, I think that AlphaTauri, indeed Liam Lawson, will score points again this weekend. When you look at how well AlphaTauri have done at power circuits, Belgium, for example, getting close at Monza, Azerbaijan as well, they've got a history of doing rather well at circuits where there's many a straight, where they have to go and manage that to their advantage. And I think that, yeah, Lawson will do it. But Tsunoda, don't discount him either on his home circuit, of course. And on that bombshell, once again, it seems we end episode 29 of F1 in Review 2023. Thank you very much for listening all the way to the end of this one, be that on your preferred podcast provider or indeed elsewhere. A reminder, you can follow us on X, formerly Twitter, and TikTok, our handle being F1 in Review. And we will be back to go and discuss all the fallout from that Japanese Grand Prix to come. An early one if you're watching, listening, or indeed observing in the UK. Qualifying Saturday starts at 7 a.m. and then unfortunately even early on the Sunday for the race, 6 a.m. if you're watching, listening or observing in the UK. And as I say, we'll be back to go and discuss all of this Grand Prix, all of the, I suppose, politics, transfers and rumours to come from it, what this all means and a whole lot more. So thank you very much for listening and we'll see you next week.